On today's episode, Dr. Liz and I welcome Dr. Alexandra Stockwell to the show. She offers some helpful tips from genuine kindness to vulnerability and openness and communication, and even not settling for compromise when it comes to differences in intimacy. And you'll love her brilliant questions she teaches all of her clients when they're feeling hurt or frustrated. Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, known as the Intimacy Doctor, is a physician and relationship coach who helps high-achieving couples create emotionally connected, passionately intimate marriages. Author of the best-selling book, Uncompromising Intimacy, and host of the Intimate Marriage podcast, she has been married for 28 years and is a mother of 4. Dr. Alexandra teaches that lasting passion comes not from compromise, but from authenticity. Featured in the New York Times, Cosmopolitan, Rolling Stone, and more, she empowers couples to build deeply nourishing relationships that model love and fulfillment for the next generation. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection. I'm psychologist Dr. Liz Hale, along with the esteemed professor, Dr. Dave Schramm. Together, we have dedicated our life's work to bringing you the best we have in valid marital research, along with a few tips and tools to help you create the marriage of your dreams. What a terrific interview today, Dave. I'm really excited about this. You know, as a physician and intimate marriage expert for the past 2 decades, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell has been guiding men and women towards bringing pleasure and purpose into all aspects of life, but especially sensual intimacy. She has coached hundreds of clients on how to experience exuberance and joy and everything from the daily grind of running a household to creating ecstatic experiences in the bedroom. It seems time that we have such a key conversation on ecstatic sensual intimacy. Welcome to Stronger Marriage Connection, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. What a joy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Me too. Well, first of all, my friend, you practice what you coach in your own marriage, which we so respect. And I must just say how much I love how you traded in, you said, your old kitchen apron for this beautiful, flirty, fun French-made apron. I thought that was lovely. And so you allowing our sensual self to show up starts with giving ourselves permission to enhance our femininity as women, for starters. Is that right?
Yes, although that's not really how it came to me. In fact, the very moment when I did get rid of my functional kind of full cover frumpy apron and trade it with a French-made apron that's functional. It's actually hard to find a French-made apron that's like flirty and actually does the job. It's not just a costume. But that all began. So as you say, I've been married 29 years now, and I have 4 children. And at the time that I'm thinking of, we had kind of an open concept home. So I was cooking in the kitchen and the children were playing in the living room, but it was all one big space with kind of an island separating them. And it was a hard day. I think my youngest was maybe 5 months, and they were squabbling, and it just was a hard day, as happens in family life and parenting. And so I was at the stove cooking dinner, and I was sautéing onions with a wooden spoon on my, in the frying pan. And I was just moving that spoon. I was so angry and I was tight, and it was like I was pushing it back and forth, like the spoon was a conveyor of how pissy I felt inside. And suddenly it occurred to me that these onions were going to cook just as well if I enjoyed it. You know, onions have such a strong aroma. I wasn't cooking something bland. And I just moved into more elegant movements, more connected movements. I found myself breathing more deeply and kind of swaying side to side with my hips. And I just realized I could actually enjoy that moment. And there was a lot that came to me in that. First of all, it was my choice. And I think that's really the most important thing, that I could be angry moving those onions around the pan, or I could feel like a woman enjoying the aroma, enjoying the fact that I inhabit a body. Like it was an invitation to a rich, sensual experience for my senses, not sexual, of course, but sensual. And then I didn't want to be in a frumpy apron, like, let's go all the way and enjoy it. I didn't in that moment put on heels and lipstick to saute my onions, but I have on subsequent days. Like, really, this was one of the origin moments of what I've come to call everyday eroticism, because my journey is that really for the first 8 years of my marriage, I had what I call functional sex, where everything was happening, but it wasn't ecstatic. We didn't feel closer afterwards. It was nothing like what the poets describe. And once I had learned how to really heat things up and align things and really look forward to times in the bedroom with my husband, it just seemed so sad to me that after all the attention and intentionality and individual and collective growth to achieve really passionate times in the bedroom, that would only happen when he was done with work and I was done with work and the kids were in bed and neither one of us was stressed and the house was cleaned up. It just went from, the whole potential to just such a small amount of time. And while I was sauteing those onions, I realized, I'm not looking to have sex all the time, but I am looking to feel good like a sensual, passionately fulfilled woman.
Yes.
A lot of the time. So
yes,
that beautiful. Was when I traded in my apron.
That is very cool. So I mean, it's about our brains anyway, right? It's how we show up. We're sexual beings.
It's about our brains, but it is not a mental shift. I mean, sure, it's a choice how we feel, but I really want to emphasize that I really think the shift is in relation to being embodied, that we can accomplish so much feeling sort of like brains moving through our lives. And yes, we can change our thoughts, but it's about, it mattered that I started swaying my hips, that I allowed the aroma of the onions to be rich for my senses, to start looking at the color as those onions started to glisten. In other words, yes, it happened with a change in my thoughts, but the experience and the sustained impact happens in the body with the sense experiences.
It's beautiful for especially for the femininity. I really get that. With masculinity for men, is that similar?
Well, I have yet to meet a man who has had a transformation through sautéing onions. So let me just say that very clearly.
Right.
Won't be that.
I think the journey is different. And because most listeners are women, I'm actually going to share the following. So once I tapped into this way of being where I felt so much better, I then really became a researcher in my own home, because that very evening when I served dinner, my husband and I are sitting across from one another with 2 kids on either side. It suddenly occurred to me in, I don't know exactly at that point, maybe 15 years of marriage, that every time I sat down to dinner with him since we first became parents, that I either ignored him because my husband is a grown up and can manage himself at the table and the kids needed my attention, or I interacted with him as a helpful co-parent. But I had not once sat down to a family dinner and looked at this man as the sexy, attractive, wonderful man who is my lover in life. And so I made, once again, an internal shift with my mind, but I felt it in my body. And to my amazement, he started interacting with me differently. Like, I never told him what I was doing. It was a private, entirely discreet research experiment. But suddenly he started giving me more attention and a kind of attention that felt really good. And he asked me questions he hadn't asked before. And I think I personally had some kind of a taboo that it wasn't right to cultivate the marital connection in front of the children, that wouldn't be healthy for them. But I was experimenting that day. And to my surprise, as I connected with my husband, and yes, he did respond with more masculinity. In other words, there was more of that polarity, which contributes to chemistry, but it happened naturally as a consequence of the shift that I made and he responded to. Our children were calmer. There was much less minding your manners needed during that dinner. And so what I found was that my changing and showing up in a way that I'm comfortable being a woman rather than just a manager, then he really responded to that. And so did the children. And they never knew until my children, who are young adults now, read my book and found out about it in the story that I share in my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. But I think I'll say one more thing, because I now have programs for men. And I think one of the most important things is that for men, particularly who want more physical connection with their wives, they often there's of course masculine bravado where, many of the exposures in society teach men to show up and feel entitled and expect things, which doesn't tend to work or anyway feel good. So then good men tend to compensate and go into something I call desperate acquiescence, where their bid for more connection, physical connection, attention, affection, often feels sort of needy and clingy and desperate and almost like wanting paternal approval, which just is not a recipe for good sexual chemistry. And so for a man, sometimes it feels good to aim for more masculinity, but sometimes that can be unnecessarily intimidating. And so the thing I like to say to men instead is, rather than looking for validation and affirmation from your wife and then feeling better, to shift your energy so you feel better and then bring that to the interaction. So I tend to talk more about like positive vitality and good energy, because masculinity has so many different associations, and sometimes it's helpful, but a lot of times it sort of gets in the way with showing up in the way that, yes, between the three of us and everyone listening, is more masculine.
I got it. That's really crucial to distinguish the two. And going back to the power of a woman, right? I think we do want our listeners to really embrace that.
Yes. And I think we often think, and there is truth in saying it takes two people for a good marriage. They both have to really be dedicated. That is true, but it is so much more than people usually think that can happen when one person makes genuine change, because that shifts the whole dynamic. And then the other person ends up responding too, unless they're really stubborn.
Mm-hmm. The power of a partner, just one, right?
That's right.
Oh gosh, because there's not enough hours in the day to discuss this crucial topic. What are the key elements, Dr. Alexandra, for developing an ecstatic sensual intimacy? If you had to just give us a short version, what would it be?
Well, in the context of long-term committed relationship, I think it's actually quite helpful to look at everything that isn't ecstatic sensuality and sex as functioning like foreplay. In other words, every little interaction brings you a little closer together, or a lot, or a little further apart. And the thing is that emotional intimacy, it's not always enough, but it definitely is a prerequisite for ecstatic sensual intimacy, because it's not the physical act that opens our hearts and fuels our lives. It's the physical act coupled with presence, attention, connection, a kind of nuance, depth of appreciation of one another's souls and personalities. It includes humor and all kinds of experiences together that if there's not enough emotional depth, if there's not enough attention put on nurturing emotional depth, we're not magic creatures that we can be sort of disconnected in our day-to-day lives, even if things look pretty good. But I mean, at below the waterline kind of disconnected. There's no magic switch that when we get to the bedroom, it suddenly flips and we can be fully present and open our hearts and open our legs and just feel ecstatic together. That requires not having all of these blocks in our day-to-day interactions. So actually, when I work with couples, this is anecdotal, but maybe, 75, 80% of the time, working on emotional intimacy just paves the way for really sensual, ecstatic experiences. And then 20, 25% of the time, I do get into the specifics of touch and how people are interacting in the bedroom, but it's really how you feel with one another that makes so much possible. And I think we tend to miss that if we watch rom-coms or porn or even church teachings. How to genuinely develop emotional intimacy is really, I think, the prime place to put attention if you want ecstatic, sensual experiences.
Beautiful.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
Yeah, Dr. Stockwell, in the area of sexual intimacy and all other areas of marriage, there's this common thought that in order to have a good marriage or a great marriage, a couple needs to be good at compromising. But you're not a fan of this advice. Why do you believe that compromising is a one-way ticket to dissatisfaction or disconnection and infrequent or even unsatisfying sexual intimacy?
I love that you asked me this question because the most common relationship advice that is given is that you need to compromise. If you want a happy marriage, you have to be good at compromise. And the thing is, if you want a bland, contented partnership, then compromise is an excellent method. That is great. But if you want more of the kinds of things we're talking about with sensual ecstasy and passion, or even just sex that feels really good for decades, compromise will not get you there. Instead, what I talk about is uncompromising intimacy. And by uncompromising, I do not mean that you're rigid or you always get your own way. It's not like that. It's more that in the context of marriage, I think of compromise as withholding who you are, your deepest truth, your desires, sometimes your challenges, what is alive and really matters. You withhold that so your partner is more comfortable. Maybe you don't know how to say it. Maybe you do, but you know it's going to be hard to hear, whatever. We withhold who we are. And then, as I said earlier, we can't bring our whole selves and self-expression to the bedroom if we don't feel comfortable sharing who we really are with our partner. So when it comes to uncompromising intimacy, it's not about being sure that you get your own way. No, it is about learning to express the truth of who you are in a way that your partner can receive it. And I'll give a super specific example because this plays out on big things like choosing where to live or where to send your kids to school or things of that sort. But it also plays out in all kinds of small ways, like which drawer the silverware is in, or who's going to do the childcare pickup and who's going to do the elementary pickup. Like, it's just so easy to focus on, quote, keeping the peace and compromising. And then you get peace, but you don't get passion. So an example of this would be, let's say there's a family and the husband and children love Italian food, pizza, pasta, and so forth. And the wife loves Thai food. She just loves Thai food. But for years, whenever the family goes out to eat, they end up going for Italian because then she knows her husband's going to be happy. The kids are going to find something easy to eat. It just seems like the most expedient thing to do. We've all been there, maybe not with Italian and Thai food, but some version of this. And so the compromise form would be that she just compromises. In fact, they don't even discuss it when they say they're going out to eat. It's just understood they're going to Italian. She's almost forgotten how much she loves Thai food. But maybe listening to this, she remembers. And then there are a few options. One is that they could, the husband and kids could have something to eat, have a sandwich before they go, and then go to the Thai restaurant and just, I don't know, have some soup or something, and she can enjoy what she wants. They could get takeout from both places and eat at a park. I mean, she could go for Thai food and the father could take the kids for Italian and they could meet up afterwards. And also, she could just say to him, I'm glad to go for Italian again, as we always do, but I just want you to know that for years I've been craving Thai and just chose not to say it. And I want you to realize the gift I'm giving that you wouldn't know unless I said this. And they could go out for Italian as they have before, but there is uncompromising intimacy at play because she shared and he's received. It's not about where they end up eating. It's about seeing one another more clearly. It's about having the language to say that so he can be appreciative of the real love in her choice to go for Italian rather than just taking it for granted. She feels unseen and there's this small disconnection, but all those small disconnections, they can add up and feel like bigger disconnection. So it's really not about what they have for dinner. It's about how well they see and care for one another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, that makes sense.
So with this, with sharing, I actually encourage people to start with really small, benign issues so that you learn to open up and share when it's not that important. And where you go for dinner, that could be important, it could not be. It depends on the couple and the circumstances. But to start sharing things where you can get used to opening up and sharing without the actual content being so confronting. And when you do this enough times, then both of you trust your ability to navigate and your choice to choose one another through sharing rather than choosing the peace through compromise.
That's very cool. I'm just trying to think what you had just said. It's peace, but not passion.
Yes, I actually, I think of peace as more kind of, this is just how I'm using these words. I would, one could use these words differently, but I think of peace as more like monotone, monochromatic. And I am much more a fan of harmony in marriage, where there are many notes, many colors, but it blends beautifully, as opposed to peace being more of a leveling things out and more akin to compromise. I don't think of peace in this way on the world stage, but I do when seeking peace in a relationship.
Wow. It can be a little passive peace, right?
Exactly.
We're using that.
It's not worth being self-expressed. But with harmony, you can have a melody, you can be backup, you can add rhythm, and it all works to make beautiful music.
Yeah.
It's so interesting why we tend to dial down the truth of who we are. And do women do that more than men? Or men are also guilty of that? And
I think we tend to think women do that more, but I think there's been some real changes in the last, I'm not being so specific, but I'll just say 2 decades or so. And yes, of course, there are the intense, entitled, narcissistic, dominating men, but that is really not the majority that I don't tend to experience those in my practice, and I don't tend to experience them in the world. Well, there are some in the world these days, let's be clear, but that in terms of regular people, they tend to be nice guys. Nice guys who, yes, they are compromising more than they even appreciate it. I was just talking to a couple 2 days ago. She's an ER physician. She knows what she wants. She has to be super functional in order to take care of lots of different people in emergency circumstances. And she's married to an extremely competent man. He's not a physician. He's an extremely competent man with a lot of professional responsibility. And in the course of talking to them, she was clear what she wants. She was clear how she shows up, and she should make these changes and he should make those changes. And this is what needs to happen. That's not the way of all women, but whether they talk that way or not, a lot of women tend to know what they want changed, how they want their men to change. And so I said to him, well, what do you want? And in truth, he's like a lot of men who, if they're not in a professional context, we're talking about marriage, and it's not the space for a superficial answer, like, I just want to have some dinner or, something like that. But there's really room for the deeper question. I do not find that men are in the habit of asking themselves what they want or what would be good for them. They are much more oriented to how to be of service. They may be missing the mark. She may not experience it as so serviceable, but that is still where his orientation is, and he's looking for validation and affirmation. And it takes courage and confidence for a woman to actually have room to hear what he wants.
does take courage and confidence.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
True.
We have to really start within, like, how do I even really feel? Sometimes I don't even know how I feel, but that's where it starts, I suppose, Alexandra. Before we can fully express ourselves, is what do I even feel? What do I even want? What's important to me?
It definitely starts there. But in terms of moving in this direction overall, I'm really a fan of small, easy steps to start with and building from there. And so really the easy step to take to move in the direction of everything we've talked about throughout this conversation is to just be curious. When you think back to the experience of being in love, it is filled with a kind of insatiable curiosity. What was your second grade teacher's name? What was your favorite vegetable when you were a child? Where have you traveled? If you didn't have this profession, what profession would you want? Like, we really can't get enough about the person we are in love with. And then we get together, and it's a beautiful thing that we know our partner and things feel stable and secure and comfortable, and we put our attention on other things. And so I think the problem is when comfort and familiarity come at the cost of curiosity, which is a very easy thing to bring back because all of us are changing and growing, maybe in big ways, maybe in small ways, but one of the most profound shifts, let's say, is for either a man or a woman to start asking their partner a question that you haven't asked before. So it could be whimsical, it could be aspirational, it could be more personal. I wouldn't recommend starting with sexual, but it could, certainly get there. Things like, if you were to have dinner with any celebrity alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask them? Or if you didn't have this profession, which one would you want? Or if you could wave a magic wand and live anywhere in the world, where would you want to live? Like, these are questions that, the content, it's not heavy, but it's getting to know a more playful, a more hidden part of one another. And you can also just ask, like, what was the most challenging part of your week last week? Or what, when you're driving to work, what are you daydreaming about these days? In other words, there's so much happening inside each of our hearts and minds and souls. And busy life does not tend to have that shared. So really asking questions like this leads to more opening, more sharing, more opening and sharing of things like where you want to go to eat or how you want to be touched eventually. And when we're asking questions and listening generously, then we naturally notice our own inner world more and share that more too. So I really think the most important thing is to become curious again.
True. It reminds me of something, Alexandra, that a professor, and I've said this on previous episodes, his name was Davey Chandler, and I was an undergraduate student, and he talks about how intimacy, intimacy stands for into me you see. Into me you see. And so it's these questions, this curiosity that you're talking about that really opens up, and I can see vulnerable, you all, and it starts with these genuine, curious questions. So I love that.
Yes, I've heard that before as well. Into me you see, and I think it's accurate, but I want to shift the focus, because when we talk about intimacy as into me you see, it puts the onus on the person seeing. And I really want to put the emphasis on the person revealing. So the way to build intimacy is to reveal who you are to your partner so that they can see into you.
Yeah, that's great. Love that.
Otherwise, we're looking for mind readers, and that's very disappointing.
Revealing. Yeah, love it.
Now, Alexandra, you're a fan. You are a fan, right, of being kind to our partner. And this isn't. It's an easy word to understand, right? You suggest it's far more complex in its application. You've got our attention. So tell us more about the complication of kindness, please.
Yes. Well, our conversation so far has been a good setup for it, because really the key is, how do we say things to our partner so that they can hear them and not shut down, not become defensive, or at least recover quickly? And the answer to that really is being kind. But I want to contrast it with being nice, because I think of, being selfish or narcissistic, that is being just really focused on your own experience and saying what you have to say. And we all know that that is bad. But I think of the opposite end of the spectrum, being nice, as focusing on the other person's experience and not honoring your own enough. And so being nice is much better for society in general and much better for keeping the peace, but it is not much better for cultivating passion. I think of kindness as really the balance of honoring your own experience, not dialing down at all what you have to say, but really saying it in a way that honors your partner's experience too. This is not dumping on your partner. This is not dropping a truth bomb of something that is important to you that he never knew about before. No, it is staying calibrated, honoring yourself, not giving that up at all, while really honoring and staying attuned to your partner's experience. So I think of that as really the fundamental element in being kind. And because we tend to think that good communication has to do with how the speaker speaks, like it's very easy to think, oh, I just need to say it. But no, you really need to say it with attunement, without ignoring how it's landing. So maybe something that is, if you're going to tell your girlfriend, you might just say the whole paragraph, but maybe when talking to your husband, you say a sentence and then pause. That would be kind to let him digest and see if he has any questions before you continue with the next sentence. The two practical things that most contribute to kindness are the pace and the tone. The tone, most of all. I've just been so surprised. Things that I thought I could never, ever say to my husband, that I can say to my husband with a gentle, kind tone. I'm aiming to model it now, that you can feel my carefulness and care without kind of cutting corners on what I want to communicate. And often that's going to mean I'm breathing fully and speaking more slowly, as opposed to the exact same information, which if I'm saying it with resentment and anger and just profound disappointment or whatever feelings I have underneath, those feelings are going to get you a response that is totally different than those same words and concepts spoken with more care. So one of, I think, the biggest keys to being kind is making sure you work through your own stuff so that when you make the communication to your spouse, you can really be focused on his experience too. If you don't have the bandwidth to be attuned to his experience too, then it is your job to talk to a therapist, journal, I don't know, go to a rage room, do whatever it is that you need to do so that internally you're more clean. But very often when people kind of work through the intense feelings, then they feel done and move on. Well, if you feel done and move on, then you're not bringing the growth into the marriage that is really needed for the kind of depth of connection that we're talking about. So I think one of the kind communications is to share what you have solved. Don't just speak up when it's a problem.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. And that's what you refer to, different types of communication that you discuss. Is this what you're referring to? Recognize which type to use in which situation?
Yes. Well, one of the things that I think causes the greatest turmoil for couples and totally unnecessary pain and suffering is when one person thinks they're having one kind of conversation and the other person thinks it's a different conversation. So the classic thing that we're all familiar with is a woman shares how she feels and her husband responds with problem solving. And then they are both frustrated and disconnected, and it wasn't helpful at all. But in every marriage, there's a collection of types of conversations. It's not the same types in every marriage, but I think it's really worthwhile to think about it. So some possible ones, yes, would be logistical things. Who's picking up who's going to make sure we have dinner tonight or whatever, logistical things. There's venting, where you're just dumping the stresses of the day. There is fighting, I suppose. There's maybe more visioning or daydreaming about the future, setting intentions for how you want to do things. There might be conversations about extended family. And one of the very most important for cultivating emotional intimacy and therefore sensual intimacy is vulnerable shares. And so the first thing, if you're going to make a communication, really, probably couples are pretty dialed in about logistical communications and it doesn't need the framework I'm about to give, although maybe sometimes it does. But mostly to be really clear what kind of communication you want to make and then say so to your partner. So for example, I really need to vent. Are you available to listen? And that needs to be a real question. He gets to say yes and he gets to say no. And his yes means a whole lot more if no is truly one of the options. And then venting can happen. And the way to really make this a win is to say to him what kind of response you want. Do you want a hug afterwards? Do you want him to say, yeah, that sucks? Like what is it that you want from him? Because then that creates a win-win and he won't be as overwhelmed listening to all of that, feeling inadequate because he can't fix it, because he knows all he needs to do is give you a hug afterwards and he knows how to do that. If you want to make a vulnerable share, same thing. I have something vulnerable to share with you. Are you available to hear it? In fact, if I wanted to make the communication about wanting Thai food and I hadn't made any vulnerable communications or done it in this way before, I absolutely would say I have a vulnerable communication. And my vulnerable communication is that I can find something I enjoy at the Italian restaurant, but what I really want is Thai food, because it's vulnerable to say that and to tell your partner what kind of a response you want, which when you start, you don't necessarily know. So you get to change your mind. That's not a problem. You can say, oh, I know I said I wanted a hug, but what I really want is for you to just sit here with me and tell me what you understood me to say, or whatever it might be. Like you can discover what that is. But I think if every couple together made a list of types of conversations that the two of them have with one another, they might like to add to the list, or it might be complete. And then they're both clear when that's the kind of conversation happening, that already contributes to harmony, emotional intimacy, each person feeling successful in the interaction.
We'll be right back after this brief message. And we're back. Well, let's dive right in.
I love this that anytime we're stuck in a relationship, I don't love that part, but I love your suggestion. Sometimes we have the same conflicts recurring again and again, and no progress is being made. You suggest that what's driving that pattern is a younger version of ourselves that doesn't know how to zoom out, see the big picture, and solve whatever problem needs attention. So you teach us to catch our breath, step back, and ask this one brilliant question.
Yes. So there are a lot of different purposes for marriage. And one of them, which I think we don't realize typically, is that in our marriage, whether we think our spouse has personality traits like our parents, one or the other or both, or not, whether they seem like totally different types of people, invariably in our marriage, our childhood wounding will be activated. Our spouses give us that gift, which can feel terrible, like salt in a wound. And it also can open the possibility of real healing and transformation. And so when feeling stuck in some kind of communication issue that is recurrent, or just feeling annoyed or unseen or any of these kinds of feelings, I think one of the most powerful questions to ask yourself is, how old do you feel right now? Now, if your partner can do it elegantly, meaning it won't feel insulting or like putting off, but really as a kindness, then the partner can also say, how old do you feel right now? Because chances are you do not feel the grown-up, mature age that you biologically are. And so it's not the grown-up you that is having this conflict. It's the 5-year-old inside you, the 12-year-old inside you. And often just realizing that already shifts things. It brings some objectivity. It takes the sting out of it, and it makes our partner less of a villain, because whatever wounding I had when I was 5 is what I'm bringing to this. And it is a very helpful way to open up and shine light in our own personal blind spots.
It's beautiful. What age, even just asking myself, right, what age do I feel right now? I actually asked myself that question last night. I want you to know, Alexandra, it really has stayed with me since I read that.
Did you discover something that you want to share?
No, just that I remember just like kind of wanting to be on the attack a little bit. And I just remember asking myself, how old do I feel right now? It was definitely younger. It was actually all I needed to do was to realize I am not in my present self. It's really all I needed to discover and just to kind of course correct.
Right.
Yes, exactly. And so then you, of course, with all of your talents personally and professionally, know how to then make that shift. But let's just talk for a moment. When you have that awareness, what is the shift? So there are a few different options. They're not all going to work in the same situation, but hopefully one of these will. So kind of the deepest option when I ask myself, how old do I feel? And I'm, let's say 5, then I will say to my husband, you know what? I need to table this, and I will go journal and let my 5-year-old say everything she has to say. And usually I will feel better. I may or may not have some nugget of wisdom that I then go back and continue the conversation with. My husband is always thrilled when this is what I do, because when I come back, I'm just in a different state and we can converse as grownups again. That's one option. Another option might be to say, yeah, I feel like a 3-year-old is not getting my way, and just like lean in, and that brings humor and connection, and then at least you know what this thing is about. Another option is just to say, well, when I look at it as the 56-year-old woman I am, I see your point. I'm like, okay, then let's try this. You know, that this is something you can lean into playfully. You can go deeply into it. You can just shake it off, and it's all good. Either way, that question has served you in the moment.
Beautiful. I think it's just really clever.
Yeah.
Really.
Alexandra, I feel like through the podcast and episodes, and we've had all kinds of professionals on here, it makes me realize actually how almost unique like my childhood was, because I had 2 parents who are just about as perfect angels, never raised their voice or swore at each other or at us, or I mean, they're just, I look back and I'm like, man, I don't remember any trauma or anything, right? I had this amazing childhood, but I realized that is not the experience of actually the majority of adults. Is there a way then to examine, our childhoods to better understand what other, childhood experiences, might come to surface or at different times in our relationship? Because I realize that is the more that I study this and interact with others, that man, that can really impact our relationships, the way that we grow up.
Yes, although I want to say that our childhood experiences, they don't have to be all about wounding for this point to be relevant. Like, I know that we talked about it as though that were the case. So you've brought up something beautiful. Like, you might have an experience, let's say, where I know nothing about your life, so this is entirely theoretical. So, you're talking with your wife and she says something, and maybe you just feel really good. Like you feel a glow spread across your heart, and you can just keep going because there isn't a problem that, or a challenge that needs attention, but that can come from her having an expression on your face, which was the expression your mother had on her face when you happily graduated from kindergarten. I'm clearly making this up, but like our bodies contain cellular memory of our influences and experiences. And so the wisdom and the growth and evolution available by getting to know ourselves better is not only attached to so-called negative experiences. I think the real question is, what are the experiences that provide fodder for our own learning and growth? And I've forgotten exactly what you asked me, which was different because I gave that response. Will you ask me again?
Actually, that's very helpful because it's often focuses on, traumatic childhoods and these wounds and how they influence. But I look back and I'm like, man, I had the most amazing childhood with two amazing parents and wonderful experiences, about as good as I think anyone could ever have. I just feel very fortunate, blessed, really. So that's helpful because not everybody has that, and everyone's childhood experiences can come flooding back. So that I've never thought of it actually that way with kind of the twist on the positivity or that reminds me of this situation or growing up or these fun, enjoyable experiences as well.
Yeah, because the most primal parts of our brain does not have time as an orientation. Everything is the kind of the present moment when it's relevant. And that is true of wonderful experiences, of complicated experiences, of neutral experiences. And for me, I think the most important thing is to look at our experiences, whatever the quality of our experiences is, as the impetus for growth. And so for you to have had such a beautiful childhood as you've described it, and be someone teaching about parenting and family systems, like you get to contribute something that is so, so valuable because what you're talking about is not theoretical. Like it's your lived experience. And that like people can access that because that's the truth in your body, mind, spirit self. So I also am really not a fan of blaming parents for our misfortunes. Like that is just awful and also kind of contributes to the drive to be a perfect parent, which is actually your description, Dave, notwithstanding, not really a possibility. It's not worth aspiring to perfection. It's much more important to aspire towards authenticity and being willing to learn from the experiences you have, whether it's as a parent or as a child when you're old enough to manage that for yourself, and really very much so as a spouse.
Right? To me, the question, how old do I feel right now, is really more about the childish part of me. You know what I mean? I'm not getting my way, so I'm going to sound like, a 12-year-old or 6-year-old. To me, that's what it was. I wasn't even thinking about my parents. You know what I mean? It was more about me. Like, I'm feeling so selfish.
Yeah, selfish or whole.
Instead of in my whole, womanhood. Yeah. I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah. Alexandra, hey, before we let you go, as we wrap up here, we like to ask all of our guests a couple of questions that, in honor of the name of our podcast, Stronger Marriage Connection. What do you feel like is the key to a stronger marriage connection?
Well, we've just been talking about it. I think the absolute key to a stronger marriage connection is for both people to be devoted to their own and one another's personal growth. Because when that is present, no matter what else arises, you can navigate it well and go from surviving to thriving at every opportunity. I just think how good it can get has no limit when you're both oriented to really supporting and pursuing your own and one another's personal growth.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that you said growth. It's not just like happy, or happiness or something, but growth is more of this journey anyway. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, because I think sometimes I even get a little discouraged sometimes where it's when I'm not perfect, right? I'm a marriage therapist and I've worked on this for years. And yet I think the whole key is, but am I better than I was last year, right? Making the comparison. Am I going the right direction?
Yeah, in terms of, we were talking about curiosity earlier. One of the questions I really enjoy is, what have you learned about yourself in the last week? If that's something you and your partner are asking one another on a monthly or weekly basis, it focuses your attention on how you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Where can our podcast friends find out more about you, Alexandra? All the tremendous resources you offer on these crucial topics of sensual and emotional intimacy. You are truly a gift, by the way.
Oh, thank you. AlexandraStockwell.com. That's my website. From there, you can find out about my programs, my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, which is available on Amazon and Audible. I do private coaching with a small number of people. And I have a podcast too, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I go into all of these kinds of topics as well. So a good place to go next is AlexandraStockwell.com.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. And then just one last question, my friend. It often comes up within groups of friends or even clients is frequency. Can you please set the record straight before we let you go on frequency regarding maybe date nights and sex itself?
Okay. Well, let's start with sex itself. I don't think that there is a magic number when it comes to frequency. I think the important thing is that both of you feel good about whatever the frequency is. And I am much more focused on the quality of the sex than the quantity of the sex. Although when the quality of the sex you're having is improving and really good, then you're going to want more of it sooner. But it's not about a specific frequency at all. It's about really feeling satisfied and more connected. In terms of date nights, I tend to think date nights are overrated for the following reason. If it's about dinner and a movie or going out and doing something that you do once a week because date nights are good, like, yes, that's a nice break from the rest of your life. But I am much more a fan of using the time together to really turn towards one another and deepen the quality of connection. And so it depends on how full your life is. I think once a week is wonderful, but maybe you ask one another a curious question every evening before going to sleep, in which case it would be more daily. But certainly once a week is beautiful because then you're never more than 6 days away from time to really nourish the relationship. Although, I just did a post on social media about date nights in different phases of our marriage, because when our kids were young, which was extended, we have big gaps in 4 kids, our date nights really were date nights at home. And yes, they were scheduled in the calendar and we turned towards one another. Maybe we had sex, maybe we didn't, but the relationship was nourished by that. Then date nights were about going out. Now we still have one child at home, but my favorite date is spending the night at a hotel somewhere. So I think it really depends on the phase of life. And the most important thing is not when you leave home together. The most important thing is that both of you can count on a regular time to not talk about logistics, not about kids, not about work stresses, but really use that time to turn towards one another. And if you're doing that once a week, so that's my answer, you're likely to do it every day as a natural consequence of it feeling good. And it doesn't take that long to do it when you're making a point of doing it on a regular basis.
Well said.
Yeah, well said. Hey, as we wrap up our time together, Dr. Alexandra, what would you say is the number one take-home message you want all of us to remember from our time today? And it may be something that you've already shared, but a takeaway of the day.
What I hope the takeaway is that no matter how complicated or how wonderful your marriage is, having a more fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. So whether that is sensual, sexual expansion or expansion and communication, just wherever you are, having it be better is a learnable skill.
Good. Love it. Love that. Liz, what about you? What's your takeaway of the day?
Thank goodness, right? I'm still stuck that it's learnable. I mean, I'm still stuck by this peace, but not necessarily passion. I think that's really fascinating to me. And I just wrote some notes here about using a gentle, kind tone and speaking more slowly with full breath. I think that's really the magic. So thank you for that. Dave, what about you? What's the gold nugget you're taking away from our time today with Dr. Alexandra Stockwell?
Yeah, all kinds of things, Liz. And that was one of them. Actually, the tone of voice that we use and the pace of that completely affects how the message and how it is received from the other person. And then something right up front we talked about that it starts with kind of a mindset and the curiosity and kind of that shift that you had, with the onions. But then it was behavior, right? If we don't act on the mindset, if we just kind of think about it but don't act, there's no change that happens with it. So I love that combination of thoughts, but then turning it into action. It's stood out to me today. So thank you for that insight.
Right.
Oh, wow. Well, it has been wonderful, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. Thank you again for joining us and spending time and sharing so much wisdom and helpful tips with us today.
Really my pleasure. I love how the two of you play off of one another and are so welcoming so that we can go anywhere to serve the listeners.
Yeah, quite the team, right?
Totally, yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, we will see you next time. That does it for us. We'll see you next time. Another episode of Stronger Marriage Connection.
And remember, friends, it's the small and simple things that create a stronger marriage connection. Take good care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye now.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Life and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.